Malaysia is a federal constitutional monarchy located in Southeast Asia. It consists of 13 states and 3 federal territories and has a total land mass of 329,847 square kilometers, separated by the South China Sea into 2 similarly sized regions: Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia. Peninsular Malaysia shares a land and maritime border with Thailand and maritime borders with Singapore, Vietnam, and Indonesia. East Malaysia shares land and maritime borders with Brunei and Indonesia and a maritime border with the Philippines. The capital city is Kuala Lumpur, while Putrajaya is the seat of the federal government. By 2015, with a population of over 30 million, Malaysia became the 43rd most populous country in the world. The southernmost point of continental Eurasia, Tanjung Piai, is in Malaysia, located in the tropics. It is one of 17 megadiverse countries on Earth, with large numbers of endemic species. Malaysia has its origins in the Malay kingdoms present in the area, which, from the 18th century, became subject to the British Empire. The first British territories were known as the Straits Settlements, whose establishment was followed by the Malay kingdoms becoming British protectorates. The territories on Peninsular Malaysia were first unified as the Malayan Union in 1946. Malaya was restructured as the Federation of Malaya in 1948, and achieved independence on 31 August 1957. Malaya united with North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore on 16 September 1963. Less than 2 years later, in 1965, Singapore was expelled from the Federation. The country is multi-ethnic and multicultural, which plays a large role in politics. The Constitution declares Islam the state religion while allowing freedom of religion for non-Muslims. The government system is closely modelled on the Westminster parliamentary system, and the legal system is based on common law. The head of state is the king, known as the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. He is an elected monarch chosen from the hereditary rulers of the 9 Malay states every 5 years. The head of government is the Prime Minister. Since its independence, Malaysia has had one of the best economic records in Asia, with its GDP growing at an average of 6.5% per annum for almost 50 years. The economy has traditionally been fueled by its natural resources, but is expanding in the sectors of science, tourism, commerce and medical tourism. Today, Malaysia has a newly industrialized market economy, ranked 3rd largest in Southeast Asia and 29th largest in the world. It is a founding member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the East Asia Summit and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and a member of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Commonwealth of Nations, and the Non-Aligned Movement. Etymology. The name Malaysia is a combination of the word Malay and the Latin-Greek suffix Psi sigma iota alpha. The word Melayu in Malay may derive from the Tamil words Malay and meaning mountain, and city, land, respectively. Malayadvipa was the word used by ancient Indian traders when referring to the Malay Peninsula. Whether or not it originated from these roots, the word Melayu, or Mlayu, may have been used in early Malay, Javanese to mean to steadily accelerate or run. This term was applied to describe the strong current of the river Melayu in Sumatra. The name was later adopted by the Malayu kingdom that existed in the 7th century on Sumatra. Before the onset of European colonization, the Malay Peninsula was known natively as Tanah Melayu, under a racial classification created by a German scholar Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. The natives of maritime Southeast Asia were grouped into a single category, the Malay race. Following the expedition of French navigator Jules Dumont d'Urville to Oceania in 1826, he later proposed the terms of Malaysia, Micronesia, and Melanesia to the Société de Géographie in 1831, distinguishing these Pacific cultures and island groups from the existing term Polynesia. Dumont d'Urville described Malaysia as an area commonly known as the East Indies. In 1850, the English ethnologist George Samuel Windsor Earle, writing in the Journal of the Indian Archipelago and Eastern Asia, proposed naming the islands of Southeast Asia as Malayunesia or Indonesia, favoring the former. In modern terminology, Malay remains the name of an ethno-religious group of Austronesian people predominantly inhabiting the Malay Peninsula and portions of the adjacent islands of Southeast Asia, including the east coast of Sumatra, the coast of Borneo, and smaller islands that lie between these areas. The state that gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1957 took the name the Federation of Malaya, chosen in preference to other potential names such as Lancaster, after the historic kingdom located at the upper section of the Malay Peninsula in the first millennium CE. The name Malaysia was adopted in 1963 when the existing states of the Federation of Malaya, plus Singapore, North Borneo and Sarawak formed a new federation. One theory posits the name was chosen so that C represented the inclusion of Singapore, North Borneo, and Sarawak to Malaya in 1963. Politicians in the Philippines contemplated renaming their state Malaysia before the modern country took the name. History. Evidence of modern human habitation in Malaysia dates back 40,000 years. In the Malay Peninsula, the first inhabitants are thought to be Negritos. Traders and settlers from India and China arrived as early as the 1st century AD, establishing trading ports in coastal towns in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Their presence resulted in strong Indian and Chinese influences on the local cultures, and the people of the Malay Peninsula adopted the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism. Sanskrit inscriptions appear as early as the 4th or 5th century. The Kingdom of Lancaster arose around the 2nd century in the northern area of the Malay Peninsula, lasting until about the 15th century. Between the 7th and 13th centuries, much of the southern Malay Peninsula was part of the maritime Srivijaya Empire. After the fall of Srivijaya, the Majapahit Empire had influence over most of peninsular Malaysia and the Malay archipelago. Islam began to spread among Malays in the 14th century via Arabs, Central Asian, Indian traders. In the early 15th century, Sultan Iskandar Shah, a runaway king of the former Kingdom of Singapore, founded the Malacca Sultanate, commonly considered the first independent state in the peninsular area. Malacca was an important commercial center during this time, attracting trade from around the region. In 1511, Malacca was conquered by Portugal, after which it was taken by the Dutch in 1641. In 1786, the British Empire established a presence in Malaya, when the Sultan of Kedah leased Penang to the British East India Company. The British obtained the town of Singapore in 1819, and in 1824 took control of Malacca following the Anglo-Dutch Treaty. By 1826, the British directly controlled Penang, Malacca, Singapore, and the island of Labuan, which they established as the crown colony of the Straits Settlements. By the 20th century, the states of Pahang, Selangor, Perak, and Negri Sembilan, known together as the Federated Malay States, had British residents appointed to advise the Malay rulers, to whom the rulers were bound to defer to by treaty. The remaining 5 states in the peninsula, known as the Unfederated Malay States, while not directly under British rule, also accepted British advisers around the turn of the 20th century. Development on the peninsula and Borneo were generally separate until the 19th century. Under British rule, the immigration of Chinese and Indians to serve as labourers was encouraged. The area that is now Sabah came under British control as North Borneo when both the Sultan of Brunei and the Sultan of Sulu transferred their respective territorial rights of ownership between 1877 and 1878. In 1842, Sarawak was ceded by the Sultan of Brunei to James Brooke, whose successors ruled as the White Rajas over an independent kingdom until 1946, when it became a crown colony. In the Second World War, the Japanese army invaded and occupied Malaya, North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore for over 3 years. During this time, ethnic tensions were raised and nationalism grew. Popular support for independence increased after Malaya was reconquered by Allied forces. Post-war British plans to unite the administration of Malaya under a single crown colony called the Malayan Union met with strong opposition from the Malays, who opposed the weakening of the Malay rulers and the granting of citizenship to the ethnic Chinese. The Malayan Union, established in 1946, and consisting of all the British possessions in the Malay Peninsula with the exception of Singapore, was quickly dissolved and replaced on 1 February 1948 by the Federation of Malaya, which restored the autonomy of the rulers of the Malay states under British protection. During this time, mostly Chinese rebels under the leadership of the Malayan Communist Party launched guerrilla operations designed to force the British out of Malaya. The Malayan emergency lasted from 1948 to 1960, and involved a long anti-insurgency campaign by Commonwealth troops in Malaya. After this, a plan was put in place to federate Malaya with the crown colonies of North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore. The proposed date of federation was the 31st of August 1963. However, the date was delayed until the 16th of September 1963 due to opposition from Indonesia's Sukarno and the Sarawak United People's Party. Federation brought heightened tensions including a conflict with Indonesia, Singapore's eventual exit in 1965, and racial strife. This strife culminated in the 13th of May race riots in 1969. After the riots, the controversial new economic policy was launched by Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak, trying to increase the share of the economy held by the Bumiputera. Under Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad there was a period of rapid economic growth and urbanization beginning in the 1980s. The economy shifted from being agriculturally based to one based on manufacturing and industry. Numerous mega-projects were completed, such as the Petronas Towers, the North-South Expressway, the Multimedia Super Corridor, and the new federal administrative capital of Putrajaya. However, in the late 1990s the Asian financial crisis almost caused the collapse of the currency and the stock and property markets. Government and politics. Malaysia is a federal constitutional elected monarchy, and the only federation in Southeast Asia. The system of government is closely modelled on that of the Westminster parliamentary system, a legacy of British colonial rule. The head of state is the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, commonly referred to as the King. The King is elected to a 5-year term by and from among the 9 hereditary rulers of the Malay states. The other 4 states, which have titular governors, do not participate in the selection. By informal agreement the position is systematically rotated among the 9, and has been held by Abdul Halim of Kedah since December 2011. The King's role has been largely ceremonial since changes to the Constitution in 1994, picking ministers and members of the upper house. Legislative power is divided between federal and state legislatures. The bicameral federal parliament consists of the lower house, the House of Representatives, and the upper house, the Senate. The 222-member House of Representatives is elected for a maximum term of 5 years from single-member constituencies. All 70 senators sit for 3-year terms, 26 are elected by the 13 state assemblies, and the remaining 44 are appointed by the King upon the Prime Minister's recommendation. The parliament follows a multi-party system and the government is elected through a first-past-the-post system. Since independence, Malaysia has been governed by a multi-party coalition known as the Barisan Nasional. Each state has a unicameral state legislative assembly whose members are elected from single-member constituencies. State governments are led by chief ministers, who are state assembly members from the majority party in the assembly. In each of the states with a hereditary ruler, the chief minister is normally required to be a Malay, appointed by the ruler upon the recommendation of the prime minister. Parliamentary elections are held at least once every 5 years, the most recent of which took place in May 2013. Registered voters of age 21 and above may vote for the members of the House of Representatives and, in most of the states, for the state legislative chamber. Voting is not mandatory, except for state elections in Sarawak. By convention, state elections are held concurrently with the federal election. Executive power is vested in the cabinet, led by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister must be a member of the House of Representatives, who in the opinion of the King, commands a majority in Parliament. The cabinet is chosen from members of both Houses of Parliament. The Prime Minister is both the head of cabinet and the head of government. The incumbent, Najib Razak, appointed in 2009, is the sixth Prime Minister. Malaysia's legal system is based on English common law. Although the judiciary is theoretically independent, its independence has been called into question and the appointment of judges lacks accountability and transparency. The highest court in the judicial system is the Federal Court, followed by the Court of Appeal and two high courts. One for Peninsular Malaysia and one for East Malaysia. Malaysia also has a special court to hear cases brought by or against royalty. The death penalty is in use for crimes such as murder, terrorism and drug trafficking. Separate from and running parallel to the civil courts are the Sharia courts, which apply Sharia law to Muslims in the areas of family law and religious observances. Race is a significant force in politics, and many political parties are ethnically based. Affirmative actions such as the new economic policy and the national development policy which superseded it, were implemented to advance the standing of the Bumiputera, consisting of Malays and the indigenous tribes who are considered the original inhabitants of Malaysia, over non-Bumiputera such as Malaysian Chinese and Malaysian Indians. These policies provide preferential treatment to Bumiputera in employment, education, scholarships, business, and access to cheaper housing and assisted savings. However, it has generated greater inter-ethnic resentment. There is ongoing debate over whether the laws and society of Malaysia should reflect secular or Islamic principles. Islamic criminal laws passed by the Pan-Malaysian Islamic Party with the support of UMNO state assemblymen in the State Legislative Assembly of Kelantan have been blocked by the federal government on the basis that criminal laws are the responsibility of the federal government, foreign relations and military. A founding member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the country participates in many international organizations such as the United Nations, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Developing Eight Countries, and the Non-Aligned Movement. It has chaired ASEAN, the OIC, and the NAM in the past. A former British colony, it is also a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. Kuala Lumpur was the site of the first East Asia Summit in 2005. Malaysia's foreign policy is officially based on the principle of neutrality and maintaining peaceful relations with all countries, regardless of their political system. The government attaches a high priority to the security and stability of Southeast Asia, and seeks to further develop relations with other countries in the region. Historically, the government has tried to portray Malaysia as a progressive Islamic nation while strengthening relations with other Islamic states. A strong tenet of Malaysia's policy is national sovereignty and the right of a country to control its domestic affairs. The policy towards territorial disputes by the government is one of pragmatism, with the government solving disputes in a number of ways. such as bringing the case to the International Court of Justice. The Spratly Islands are disputed by many states in the area, and the entirety of the South China Sea is claimed by China. Nevertheless, unlike its neighbors of Vietnam and the Philippines, Malaysia has avoided any conflicts with China. However, since China has started encroaching its territorial waters, Malaysia has become active in condemning China. Brunei and Malaysia in 2009 announced an end to claims of each other's land, and to resolve issues related to their maritime borders. The Philippines has a dormant claim to the eastern part of Sabah. Singapore's land reclamation has caused tensions, and maritime along with land border disputes exist with Indonesia. Malaysia has never recognized Israel and has no diplomatic ties with it, with the country ever condemning the Israelis' action during their raid over a Gaza humanitarian mission and request the International Criminal Court to take any action against them. Malaysia has stated it will only establish an official relations with Israel once a peace agreement with the State of Palestine been reached, and called for both parties to find a quick resolution. Malaysian peacekeeping forces have contributed to many UN peacekeeping missions, such as in Namibia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Somalia, East Timor and Lebanon. The Malaysian Armed Forces have three branches: the Royal Malaysian Navy, the Malaysian Army, and the Royal Malaysian Air Force. There is no conscription, and the required age for voluntary military service is 18. The military uses 1.5% of the country's GDP, and employs 1.23% of Malaysia's manpower. Currently, Malaysia is undergoing major program to expand and modernize all three branches of its armed forces. The Five-Power Defense Arrangements is a regional security initiative which has been in place for almost 40 years. It involves joint military exercises held among Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Joint exercises and war games also been held with Brunei, China, Indonesia and the United States. Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam have agreed to host joint security force exercises to secure their maritime border and tackle issues such as illegal immigration, piracy and smuggling. There are fears that extremist militants' activities in the Muslim areas of the southern Philippines and southern Thailand would spill over into Malaysia.